Hi, it's Michael Senoff with Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. The title of this interview is called How to Eat Your Way to Good Health. It's an interview with world-renowned physician T. Colin Campbell. T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, has been described as one of the most important books on nutrition ever. It is said that reading it could save your life. So in this interview, you'll meet Mr. Campbell and hear exactly what makes his study so important. While trying to solve the problem of malnutrition in the Philippines, Dr. Campbell noticed that families who were eating the most protein were also suffering the most with diseases like cancer. This simple observation led to a 20-year study on the effects that diet has on disease, particularly cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. And the results were not only astounding, they were against Dr. Campbell's own personal beliefs. But the good news is you can eat your way to being disease-free. And in this interview, you'll hear how to do it. You'll also hear examples of what you should be eating to repress heart disease and delay aging. You'll learn clear and straightforward advice that will help you create your own optimum diet today. You'll learn the single most harmful chemical that most of us consume every day that turned the cancer on in laboratory animals. You'll learn the real reason why most doctors fail when it comes to preventing disease and how to take over and stay healthy. You'll learn the one-size-fits-all recommendation that can restore health for everyone. Dr. Campbell says that most people think about nutrition on a casual level. They know they should be eating more fruits and vegetables, but don't actually plan on doing it. This interview is an important first step to taking control of your life and having the healthy future you deserve. Now let's get going.
Hi, this is Chris Costello, and I've teamed up with Michael Senoff to bring you the world's best wellness-related interviews. So if you know anyone struggling with their weight, with cancer, diabetes, ADHD, autism, heart disease, or other health challenges, please send them to Michael Senoff's HardToFindSeminars.com. Today we'll be talking with T. Colin Campbell, author of the best-selling book, The China Study, Startling Implications for Diet, Weight Loss, and Long-Term Health. The China Study was written by T. Colin Campbell and his son, Thomas M. Campbell II, and has been called the most comprehensive study of nutrition ever conducted. Dr. Dean Ornish says everyone in the field of nutrition science stands on the shoulders of Dr. Campbell, who is one of the giants in the field. This is one of the most important books about nutrition ever written. Reading it may save your life. John Robbins says T. Colin Campbell is recognized as a brilliant scholar, an educated researcher, and a great humanitarian. If you truly want to take charge of your health, read the China Study and do it soon. So, Dr. Campbell, you discovered some amazing things in your research, which you describe in the China Study. Can you tell our listeners, what that process was, kind of the step-by-step, what you found out?
I mean, as I said in my doctoral dissertation at Cornell University, I was doing research with my professors on the idea of trying to figure out, more effective ways and productive ways of producing more animal-based protein. Then, a little later, while being at Virginia Tech for 10 years, actually, I got involved in an international program in the Philippines where our charge was to tackle the problem of malnutrition in children. And we generally assumed in those days, and still to some extent these days, children are malnourished, at least nutritionally speaking, because they don't get enough calories or they don't get enough protein. And the protein thing obviously was something we were very interested in. It also was consistent with my training because in my doctoral dissertation, as I said, we were trying to figure out ways to promote the greater consumption of protein, especially animal-based protein. So we were tackling the problem in part that way in the Philippines. But what I noticed when I was there, sort of happenstance, was that although the vast majority of the Filipinos did not consume as much protein as we did in the West, and of course, we thought that we had a better deal here than they did there, whereas the majority of people did not consume enough protein, there were a few who did. Few families who were getting protein more or less at our levels. But then it also turned out that these are the families who had children, for example, who were more likely to experience liver cancer, primary liver cancer, which is virtually unheard of as far as young people are concerned. It was anecdotal, it wasn't documented, it wasn't any of that kind of thing. It was just something that my surgeon friends told me about when I was working with them. And so it was a bit at odds with what you're trying to do, because these families consuming more protein, having children, you have a greater likelihood of getting more cancer. I mean, it really sounded crazy. But then there was a study that came from India with experimental animals that showed, in fact, that when they were studying the formation of liver cancer in these rats, and they fed the higher levels of protein, these animals, their liver cancers grew faster. And so all of a sudden, experimental animal studies were supporting what I was seeing in children. So it was on the basis of those two observations that then I came home, essentially, and organized a study with NASA Institutes of Health funding, NIH funding, for the next 27 years, working on this question concerning the effect of protein consumption on the development of experimental cancer.
27 years. That's a good chunk of time.
Yes, it was. I had lots of students. We had a large number of publications published, I should say, in the very best scientific journals on these studies. And so I really got totally immersed in the whole question concerning the effect of protein on cancer development. Eventually it expanded into the effect of other nutrients as well on experimental tumor development too. But in any case, we focused on the question of protein and its ability to modify, if you will, liver cancer development in these rats. Now, it turns out that's a fairly narrowly focused kind of investigation, but it served the purpose of understanding how cancer works. And it also provided some remarkable findings that I never expected to see involving the interrelationship between nutrition and cancer. There was no one actually at that time, to my knowledge, in fact I know there wasn't, who was really working in any serious way on this question. There were a couple of others who were sort of doing a few studies in a more general way of nutrition and, let's say, experimental cancer development, but none of them anywhere near the detail that we were doing. In any case, we really tried to understand, what was going on at the biochemical level. So that in a sense, I sometimes said, like, it's almost as if I was crawling inside of the cell to see what was going on. First off, we wanted to know whether or not, higher protein intake actually did turn on cancer, as the Indian workers had reported, and as I was seeing in children. So we did those kind of studies. Sure enough, it did. There was no question about that, and it was very prominent. The second part of the question that we wanted to address was, if this is so, and it's a very provocative idea, how does it work? So we were looking for the so-called explanatory mechanisms. That's the biochemical mechanisms by which it worked. In any case, to make a long story short, we did this study in many different ways. We repeated it many times over. We got to a point where we could basically turn on and turn off experimental cancer development in these animals by fairly modest changes in dietary protein intake. And of course, the higher the protein intake, the higher the cancer growth rate. And also equally remarkable, I think, was the fact that the level of increase, the amount of increased protein intake required to do this was not that much. And they were levels consistent with the kind of levels of protein that we humans tend to consume. In other words, to be specific, to go from, let's say, a protein level of 10% of total calories, which is enough, by the way, both for rats and for humans, go from 10% up to 20%, which is not a big increase, one would think. But we saw sharp increases in cancer development in that case. If we would drop it, we'd sort of feed 20% for a while, watch the cancer develop, switch the animals over to 5% or 10%, we'd turn it off. And the most remarkable thing of all was the fact that the protein that we were using to turn on cancer was casein, the main protein of cow's milk. And having been raised on a dairy farm and believing, if I knew anything about nutrition in those days, and I didn't know much, but if I knew anything at all, it was the fact that consuming milk was always considered to be a good source of protein. So here it is, we're finding that the main protein of cow's milk is turning on this experimental cancer development.
Hi, it's Michael Senoff with HardToFindSeminars.com. Thanks for watching this video. Many of my interviews last 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, sometimes even up to 2.5 hours long. They're actual mini seminars, and you've just listened to a short sample of just one of over 117 hours of exciting, hard-hitting, mind-blowing interviews on how to make money in direct mail, advertising, copywriting. I assure you, there is not a resource anywhere on the internet or on the planet that comes close to the free information I provide at HardToFindSeminars.com. So go right now to HardToFindSeminars.com and you'll have free access to 117 hours of audio interviews with typed word-for-word downloadable transcripts and downloadable MP3 files. Please browse some more of the videos or go right directly to HardToFindSeminars.com. Thanks for watching.